In this lesson, we'll learn how to use layer masks here inside of Photoshop. Okay, great. So go ahead and open up the Lesson 33 Begin file with me, and you'll be able to follow along. So up until now, we've looked at a number of different tools and techniques here inside of Photoshop, but you should have noticed there's one common theme, and that's how we can begin to work non-destructively, meaning that we're not destroying the pixels inside of Photoshop, yet we're taking steps to preserve those pixels. So one key component in working non-destructively here in Photoshop is the mask. And masks are, we're going to talk about layer masks first, which are basically located over inside your layer panel. So you can see here inside this document I have two layers. I have our model, and then I have this fire layer. So looking at our model here, if we wanted to jump in here and maybe knock out this red curtain behind her, one might think of maybe first coming in and using your eraser tool. So you can see here that as I begin to erase this away, we're revealing the fire layer underneath it. But what we're also doing as we use our eraser tool to erase these pixels is we're destroying these pixels. Once we have done this enough times and we've run out of undos, we can't go back and get these back unless we load a previous version of this file or revert the file. So this is not a good habit to get into in terms of removing the background. It's very destructive. So what we can do instead, let me just hit Control-Z to undo that, is we can utilize a layer mask. Now inside your layers panel, the layer mask button is right down here, and as soon as I click on that, we're going to add this little white square to the right of the layer thumbnail right here. So in looking at this, this is something that may look familiar to you because when we looked at adjustment layers, every time we created an adjustment layer, a mask came attached to it, and we're going to look at that here in just a moment. But let's come over here at this point. And notice on our mask, right now I currently have these little brackets that appear around the corners. That indicates that not only do I have this layer selected, but I also have the mask selected here. So when you start working with masks, it becomes really important to remember which you have selected, whether it's the mask thumbnail or whether it's the layer thumbnail. So in the case of a mask, basically what you need to know is, first of all, that it starts off as white. That indicates that nothing is being masked out. Everything is visible on that particular layer with the mask attached. But as we begin to add in darker values, let's say we just come over and grab our brush tool, and I'm going to hit the D key on my keyboard, and then I'm going to hit that button to reverse so that black is my foreground color. With my brush and my mask selected, if I come in here at this point and begin to paint black paint into my mask, notice what's happening. First, a little black spot is going to show up right there in the mask preview, but we're also having this effect of basically revealing the layer underneath this particular layer. So we are actually hiding. So basically what a mask defines for this layer that it's attached to is transparency. So thinking about that, basically the areas that we have not painted in, those are going to be completely opaque. Whereas this area we've painted this black spot, that is looked at as transparent. So if we came in here and actually hit our fire layer, you can see here the transparency grid here inside of Photoshop, which is this little gray and white checkered background pattern. So that indicates there's transparency in that area. So let's come back in and turn our fire back on. So at this point, we could continue to come in here and try and paint around our model here. But I want to show you one thing here. As it deals with this mask right here, notice this little chain link icon between the mask thumbnail and the layer thumbnail. So this indicates that this particular mask is linked to this layer. So if we came in here and tried to move this around, you'll see here that we're moving both the layer as well as the mask around. So let's come in here and actually click on that little icon, and it's going to disappear. But now if we begin to move this mask around, you'll notice that now that transparent spot is moving around. So we're revealing different areas underneath this layer because we don't have our mask linked to the layer itself. So be really careful if you've ever accidentally moved a mask, maybe you unlinked it for whatever reason. They can be really hard to get back in the correct place. So I would just leave that linked if you need to, or if at all possible here. So let's go ahead and grab our brush tool again here. And notice that, again, we're painting in black to get this transparency, but we can always come back in here and hit, say, our X key on our keyboard to switch it over to white. And now look, we're actually coming in and painting back in the opaque pixels. So we're kind of undoing this mask one brush stroke at a time, just simply by painting in white in the areas that were previously painted black. So I'm going to come in here and paint a little bit more black in. Maybe Alt right click and drag and make a little bit larger brush. And we'll just come in and paint kind of this larger area. Now, at this point, we've painted with both black and white into our mask, but ultimately, really, we can paint any grayscale value into this mask. So let's say here, instead of black, we want to come in and maybe paint sort of a 50% gray. So I'll just go ahead and set that here in the color picker. And now if we come in and begin to paint that, it may not be as visible there, but up here, you can see here how essentially we're seeing a little bit of the fire through, and we're also seeing a little bit of the image, because basically it's almost like reducing the opacity with this layer opacity slider in the areas we paint, maybe to 50%. So basically the result is we can now see both of the layers. We can see a little bit of the model here. We can also see a little bit of the fire. So also notice here kind of what that's done to my mask. We've got gray inside the mask and black inside the mask, in addition to the white. Now, we can always isolate this mask. We can come in and maybe we just want to work on the mask pixels. So if we hold down our Alt key and click on that mask, you'll notice here that my canvas completely changes. What we're looking at here is the content of the layer mask. As a matter of fact, if you look up here in my document tab, it says layer mask right there, because that's what we're inside. It's almost like we have opened the door to the layer mask, gone inside, and now we're looking at it on our canvas. So if you ever need to come in and do a little bit of precision painting inside your mask, this is a really good way to do that. Now I want to simply Alt click on my mask again to get back out of that. But what we can also do is if we hold the Shift key on our keyboard and click on that, you'll notice that this big X appears over our mask. So this is essentially hiding our layer mask here. So you can see now we're looking at the layer without any kind of masking effects applied to it. Let me go ahead and shift click on that again and we'll bring that back. And actually I'm going to go ahead and control backspace to fill my mask with my background color, which is white. So control backspace and there we go. I'll go ahead and hit D on my keyboard and X. So again, I have black set as my foreground color here. All right, fantastic. Now, when it comes to creating a mask here, there's a number of ways to do it. We have created sort of a fresh mask here, an empty mask, and we can come in and paint whatever we want to into that. But if we were to say delete this mask, let's just click it and drag it to the trash can here. It's going to prompt us with this information here. It says, do we want to apply the mask or do we want to delete it? If we were to apply it, any kind of masking effect that was still on that mask would be flattened into this layer. But seeing as how there's just white pixels on the mask right now, really it wouldn't have any effect. So let's just go ahead and delete the mask. Now, masks and selections really kind of work hand in hand. Now, we learned about a lot of our selection tools in previous lessons, but rather than come in and try and hand paint out this background here, what we could do is maybe we could come over here and use our quick selection tool and come in and make a selection of either the background or the model before the mask is actually created. So let's come over here and just kind of work on selecting the background. I'm just going to click and drag over here, sort of like that. We're going to make sure we're adding to our selection. We're going to click and drag around. Drag down on here just like so. Maybe drag a little bit in there. And kind of continue to just kind of fill in these areas. Now it looks like I actually selected her legs, so I'm going to deselect those by holding down the Alt key and just dragging over those just like so. All right, fantastic. So that's a really rough selection, but we've got basically the entire background around our model selected. So, but what you need to know, if we were to come over here and click on our layer mask button right now, what this is going to do is it's going to mask out everything that's currently not selected. So in this case, if we click on that button, you'll see here that it masks out the model. Well, that's the exact opposite effect that we want this mask to have. So let's undo that with a Control-Z and come back here. And we can do one of two things at this point. We can either invert our selection, and we can do that by coming up to Select and choosing Inverse, just like so. And now we have the model selected, not the background. And once we do that, we can come over and click on the layer mask, and there we go. We've got the model only here. Now, that's one way we could go about it. Let me just go ahead and step back using Control-Alt-Z a couple of times. And here's our background selection made again. Now what we can also do is simply come over and Alt-click on the Layer Mask button. And that's going to have the reverse effect. It's going to basically mask out whatever it is we have selected. So in this case, it is the background. All right, fantastic. So with that said, like I said, again, you have a number of different ways a mask can show up. If we come in here and maybe wanted to begin changing some of the colors here, we could come in and do a hue saturation adjustment layer. And again, as with previous lessons, we see how there's a mask that actually comes attached to this adjustment layer. So let's say maybe we wanted to change the dress for our model here, change the color of it from blue to something different. So let's come in here and just kind of work on that, and we will go ahead and shift the hue here, and we'll go ahead and shift it to maybe something like that'll work. I like that color. So obviously we've made a hue saturation change to everything below this adjustment layer, but we can come in here on this mask and maybe use our brush tool to begin to paint out some of these areas that we don't want this effect to be had on. So we could come in here and kind of start to hand paint those in. You know, we've already actually created a mask here that can do kind of the exact same thing for us. So rather than paint into this new mask, what we can do is we can actually transfer a mask from one layer to another. So in this case, what I would want to do is simply Alt on my keyboard and then drag this mask and drop it right on top of this hue saturation layer. So when I do that, Photoshop's going to ask me, do you want to replace this mask? And if I say yes, you'll see here we now have that mask on both layers. So obviously we just want this particular mask to affect her dress and not her skin and her hair and things of that nature. So we could come in and begin to add to this mask at this point. So coming in here and just kind of maybe painting out her legs, sort of like so. I'm just doing a really quick rough mask job on this. So paint out this hand. And just come in here and paint her face back in, sort of like so. All right, fantastic. So as you can see, masks are very, very powerful things here inside of Photoshop, and they enable us to work non-destructively. So we've begun learning about layer masks here in this lesson. Now, I would spend a little bit of time in between lessons experimenting with these layer masks just a little bit. They take a little bit of practice getting used to, but once you get the hang of them, you won't know how to work in Photoshop without them. So with this already under our belts, let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson, because I want to show you how we can begin to really refine our mask with a lot of precision.